Well, good afternoon. Oh, wow. Okay, yes, clearly we should have been serving wine. You all are a little tense. Good afternoon. There we go, much better. Welcome to our 10th Legacy Washington exhibit. This is really an exciting day, and we are so looking forward to sharing these powerful stories with you and opening our exhibit. And so thank you all for being here today. I'm Secretary of State Kim Wyman, and I'm going to be today's MC. The first thing that I want to do, and this is always the most pressure-filled element of being a speaker with elected officials in the room, former and current. So I'm going to invite all elected officials, both current and former, to please stand and be recognized for your service. And we thank you on behalf of the state of Washington. Thank you. Anyone who has ever emceed an event knows that the worst thing you can do is miss an elected official. So I didn't have a list and I wasn't going to risk it. All right. So 109 years ago, on November 8th, 1910, the women of Washington finally won the vote permanently. But as Cokie Roberts put it so eloquently, we had the right to vote as American citizens. We didn't have to be granted it by a bunch of guys. Good one. All right. In 1883, it's only fair to note, the guys in the Territorial Assembly approved women's suffrage. But the all-male state Supreme Court revoked women's voting rights literally with the stroke of a pen. Today, it's altogether fitting that we gather across the flag circle from the Temple of Justice, where the Washington State Supreme Court now boasts a 6-3 female majority with the Chief Justice, Mary Fairhurst. It's pretty exciting. And Mary is one, oh yes, there we go. We should. Justice Fairhurst is one of our 21 remarkable women that we will be spotlighting in this exhibit. Ahead of the Curve, Washington Women Lead the Way celebrates the fact that the suffrage victory here in 1910 energized the national movement. So I want to welcome all of you, and I want to say thanks to the women's votes and women's voices that have made it so 127 women, a record number, which is also kind of sad, now serve in the United States Congress. And what we can really be proud of here in Washington State is 7 of those women are our senators and representatives. And I think, as you all know, they include Senators Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell, and Representatives Kathy McMorris Rodgers, Jamie Herrera Butler, Susan Del Bene, Pramila Jayapal, and Kim Schreier. All right. Today we invoke the spirit of Catherine May, the first Washington woman elected to Congress, and Julia Butler Hansen, the second. It was Julia Butler Hansen's dream to become the first female Speaker of the Washington House of Representatives. In 1954, she came within a few votes. But the men closed ranks, at least at the last minute, to deny her both the speakership that she deserved and had earned. But I believe she would be very proud to know that in 2020, 66 years later, a woman, Laurie Jenkins, will be the first woman to wield the gavel in our House of Representatives. It's an honor to be a woman serving in elected office here in our state on the eve of the 2020 centennial of the ratification of national suffrage. And there's a sense of sisterhood that I think bridges the decades. However, we should give another shout out to the guys. Some marched as suffragists themselves, as suffragents. That's a banner, can't make that up. And in 1910, fully 64% of the all-male electorate approved women's suffrage in Washington. All 39 counties voted votes for women, or backed votes for women. But today, to borrow a slogan from the suffragists of 1910, this is the woman's hour. All right. Washington women have always been ahead of the curve. They've always led the way, and that's what we're celebrating with this exhibit. Women can build bridges literally and figuratively. They're fighting cancer, poverty, and global warming. They're telling us the truth about our history, climbing mountains, winning gold medals, helping ensure that no child is left behind. Governor Chris Gregoire, a leader in the fight for equal pay, is with us today. So is federal judge Carolyn Dimmick, the first woman to serve on the Washington State Supreme Court. So is Fawn Sharp, the president of the Quinault Indian Nation. So is Nancy Shippentauer, whose remarkable mother, Janet McLeod, was often called the Rosa Parks of the American Indian movement. Linnea Laird is one of the most accomplished highway engineers in Washington history. Jennifer Belcher, who went on to become our state's first female commissioner of public lands, was an early advocate of comparable worth. Laurie Matsukawa is an award-winning TV journalist. Trish Millines Dziko, a computer scientist, left Microsoft to become a philanthropist. Historian Stephanie Coontz wrote a book on the way we weren't. And soon, Justice Barbara Madsen will be joining us shortly after court proceedings. They're hearing oral arguments. Or is she here? You snuck in. Welcome, Justice Madsen. Justice Madsen is here to speak on behalf of her friend and colleague, Chief Justice Fairhurst. Today we honor the memory of Josephine Corliss Preston, the Walla Walla suffragist who in 1912 became our first statewide elected woman official. And Josephine's remarkable history leads the way to this project. She was a charter member of the League of Women Voters. Any League of Women Voters? There we go. But in her 16 years as superintendent of public instruction, she elevated Washington schools to be among the best in the nation, promoting junior colleges as a way to make a college degree accessible to people in rural areas. Another great educator, Anna Marie Causeway, the first female president of the University of Washington. No dogs, okay, just saying. I guess there's a lot of cougars in the audience. Okay, that was, she's also profiled in Ahead of the Curve. And we also tell the story of Dr. Mabel Seagrave, a pioneering Seattle physician who volunteered to serve in France during World War I. Mary Claire King, a brilliant scientist. There we go. Mary Claire King, a brilliant scientist, discovered the first gene linked to hereditary breast cancer. Melinda Gates is saving lives and changing lives around the world. Dorothy Stimson Bullitt of King 5 created one of America's most fearlessly independent media companies while also boosting public television. Trailblazing female journalists like Jean Anderson and Laurie Matsukawa are her legacy. A key chapter in Ahead of the Curve reminds us that the extraordinary, ordinary women have changed history. Elsie Parrish, a Wenatchee hotel chambermaid who was shortchanged by her employer. She took her case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and won a landmark victory in 1937. Her triumph cleared the legal path for not only minimum wage, but also Social Security. It took a long, hard struggle to achieve the $500 million settlement for the underpaid female state workers that Chris Gregoire spearheaded in 1986. We must also invoke the memory of Belle Reeves, our first female Secretary of State. Belle was so revered that when she passed away in 1948, she was accorded the first and only state funeral in the House chamber. And one of the things that I love about this exhibit, I think it really typifies sort of this big tent that I think women leaders bring to their positions, that we stand for really having more civility and less name calling. And I think that is really important right now. Or as Governor Dan Evans put it so eloquently in his third inaugural address nearly 46 years ago, I'd rather cross the aisle than cross the people. All right. So real quick, I would like to talk a little bit about why we're here and why we do this, and then I'm going to turn this over to our fabulous speakers. The Secretary of State's office houses the state history, our state library, and our state archives. And we found that the most compelling way to share that history with each of you is to tell these incredible stories of the people of Washington that have not only made our state better and moved it forward, they've changed our country and they've changed our world. And these stories all come from this incredible team I get to work with every day called Legacy Washington. And it's really, this exhibit is their brainchild. We knew going into the centennial of women's suffrage that a lot of organizations would be covering this beautiful, wonderful topic. And we didn't want to repeat everything everyone else was doing. And so the idea that they had was, why don't we find some extraordinary historic women in Washington, and let's pair their stories with modern era examples. And so what you're going to see today when you see the exhibit and then get to read in the book that we will be publishing before Christmas and the holiday rush, are these extraordinary stories told by this wonderful team. So I want to introduce first and foremost John Hughes, who is our chief historian for the state of Washington. Laura Mott, who's our development director and gets the funds raised to tell these beautiful stories. Our wonderful steal from the Seattle Times, Bob Young, who is our historian also. Lori Larson, who is our chief researcher, book designer, and blogger. And Amber Rainey, who worked in our state archives before she came over. And I just have to note that the exhibit you're going to see, this is the first one she got to design start to finish. So we're very proud of her. Actually, not just design. She oversaw the whole project. No big deal. And then finally, this team are led by two extraordinary women, Director Heather Hirotaka and Deputy Director Stephanie Horn. All right, now it is my honor to turn this podium over to these extraordinary women who we have the honor to profile. And I'm going to begin by introducing our 22nd governor of the state of Washington, Chris Gregoire.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you today and among these unbelievably distinguished historical women in the great state of Washington. I want to start by giving a huge, big shout out and thank you to our wonderful Secretary of State, Kim Wyman. Thank you for hosting. Thanks for what you're doing. And like Kim, I want to give a shout out to John Hughes, to Bob, to the whole team. Thank you guys for what you're doing. I went back after I left office and I ended up teaching at the Kennedy School at Harvard. And everybody who was there said I was the walking chamber of commerce for the state of Washington. And I am. And I'm proud of our great state. And there's lots of reasons to be proud. But one of the reasons to be proud that brings us all here today is how we have led on so many things, but most particularly on women's issues, women's rights, and electing women. So I want to give you just a few examples of what I've personally experienced in my professional life that I think befalls this great day as a day for all of us to celebrate. So it was 1981 when a study had been requested by then Governor Dan Evans, and that study, authored by Helen Remick, who's here today. Thank you, Helen, for the great work you did. Advocated by Jennifer Belcher, who is not here today, but nonetheless deserves tremendous credit. Anyway, the study concluded, now bear with me for just a moment, that female-dominated jobs were paid on average 20% less than male-dominated jobs. This is called comparable worth, not to be confused with equal pay for equal work, but equal pay for comparable work. And so this was one of a kind and leading in the country when this study was actually done. And what they do is they look at, or what Helen actually looked at, is the comparability of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And because in part driven by the private sector, for example, female-dominated jobs typically were paid much less than male-dominated jobs that required no more knowledge, skills, or expertise than what the female jobs did. Anyway, when that came out, the Washington Federation of State Employees filed a lawsuit in federal district court, and Judge Tanner was presiding. I, for reasons that only you can think of, I'm sure, was assigned to represent the state of Washington in this lawsuit. Decision came out at the district court in which the state was concluded as having discriminated in setting its salaries and ordered to pay 15,000 women back pay and raised salaries in order to make up for it. I can't tell you how many letters, emails, telephone calls the office got from folks in the business sector, particularly male-dominated folks in the business sector, saying that I had thrown the case. Shame on them for letting a woman be involved in the case. How could that have allowed to have happened? She threw the case. It was 1985, and the Washington State Legislature appropriated $42 million, supported by then Governor Booth Gardner, and the $42 million was a down payment for comparable worth. But it was conditioned on a settlement that had to be achieved by midnight of New Year's Eve that December of 1985. Well, in September, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the decision that had been made by the district court. Again, flooded with emails and so on and so forth from the opposite side. So it was an interesting and one of the more daunting challenges that I had had up until that point in my legal career, by everybody second-guessing what my motivation was, why I was doing what I was doing, and to be and Bob put it best, at the end of the day, I was being a lawyer. Now, was I happy by the settlement? No, I was ecstatic by the settlement, okay? It went to the legislature. It was appropriated, almost $500 million, 482 to be specific, to be paid between 1985 and 1992. And you may think we led the way. We did not lead the way. We're the only that really saw the value of doing this. And I want to thank everybody who was engaged and involved and advocated to make that day possible. I'm proud of the great state of Washington, and I'm proud that we led the way in that effort. Forward a little bit, it's 1992. I'm a candidate for Attorney General. I'm the first woman candidate for Attorney General. First debate, two male prosecutors are one in the primary, one in the general, are on the stage with me, and we're having a debate. I'm leaving the stage, and I'm headed to the back, and an elderly gentleman comes up to me and says, "Now tell me again what you're running for." And I said, "Well, I'm running for Attorney General." And he looked down and shook his head, and I said, "Is there a problem?" "Yes, women should not be generals." So I tried to explain that this was not a military job that I was running for, but rather a legal job to head the largest law firm in the state, to represent the people of the state and state government. He maintained women should not be generals. So that year, I was elected as the first woman Attorney General. Jennifer Belcher was elected as the first woman Lands Commissioner. Deborah Sen was elected the first woman Insurance Commissioner. And Patty Murray was elected the first woman U.S. Senator. To add to that, Jennifer Dunn and Maria Cantwell were elected to Congress, and re-elected was Jolene Unsold. When it was all said and done, all I could do was think about that guy and what he was thinking when this all happened. By the way, it was 2 years later, and I went to a grade school class of, I think it was third graders, and I was trying to teach these little third graders about consumer protection, bait and switch, if you know what I mean. But anyway, I'm leaving, and this little guy comes up and he pulls on my jacket, and he says, "Hey, lady, I want to be just like you." And I thought to myself, you know, that elderly gentleman, no generals, he was so yesteryear, and this guy's so tomorrow. We're in good hands for the future of the state. When I ran for Attorney General, we did a poll, and the poll came back loud and clear. I was not tough enough to be Attorney General. And so I thought, that's interesting. They say the same thing about my male opponents, but I'm sure they didn't poll on that because they were both prosecutors. Well, 12 years later, I'm running for governor. We did the same poll. Now, admittedly, I'd done some things during those 12 years that might have convinced some people that I was tough enough, but little did I expect the poll to come back and say I was too tough to be governor. But it was 2004. I was elected by a landslide, many of you may recall, still recognized nationwide as a landslide, P.S., to be governor of this great state. I was elected at the same time we had serving U.S. Senators Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell. Now, why do I say all that? Because we were the only state, and to this day, as far as I know, the only state that has ever had two women U.S. senators and a woman governor. So we wanted to make sure that no one could ever catch us. And so we added to that. The majority leader in the Senate, some of you may recall, was Senator Lisa Brown, and the first woman Chief Justice of the Washington State Supreme Court was my classmate, Barbara Madsen. So there we were. There we were leading the way, and with that list, I submit to you, I don't know when, if ever, anybody's going to catch the state of Washington. We have always been at the forefront in electing women to the legislature. Some of you may remember back a long time ago, we led the nation in doing so. But what's more important about how long we've led is the fact that women have been in the most important positions in both the House and the Senate. They have been chair of some of the most important committees. Lisa Brown, majority leader. Before that, we had a majority leader who was a female. And then, as Kim said, in 2020, we will have the first woman Speaker of the House, Laurie Jenkins. So we have led in that realm in every respect. And as you mentioned as well, our state Supreme Court, we have long led the nation in electing women to our Washington State Supreme Court. But just to make sure no one can catch us, we now have 6 of 9, and the chief is also a woman. So Washington State continues to be the leader that it always has been. And then our congressional delegation, where we have 5 of 10 are women members of Congress and 2 women U.S. senators. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you join me in saying I am proud of the great state of Washington. I do not want to pay short shrift, however, to who gave us the rights in the beginning to vote, who's brought the issues to the forefront that are so important to us, not the least of which is education and equal pay and health care, and the list goes on and on. So while I've talked about elections, make no mistake, Washington State, when it comes to women's rights, women's issues, and electing women, has led continuously throughout its history. So I say to you, thanks for coming today. Kim, again, thank you for what you're doing, and I am proud of the great state of Washington.
I may have forgotten to mention that these are powerhouse women, and you're going to see that. And it's not just in politics, it is across every sector. So now I would like to invite Fawn Sharp to give remarks, please.
Thank you. You know, when I was invited to provide remarks for this event, I gave it a lot of thought, and it became very clear to me that this is a sort of occasion where, in my very limited capacity as one individual in one generation, it's impossible for me in my own right to pay homage and honor a century of women's suffrage. And so yesterday morning, after I finished a workout, I made a decision to fast. So I went 24 hours without eating to call upon our Creator's wisdom and guidance for today's words. And when I woke up this morning, I was a little unnerved because it still wasn't on my heart. And I have a day like today ahead of me and the distinguished members. I'm so incredibly honored, Secretary Wyman and John Hughes, a friend of mine that I've known since I was 10 years old, maybe younger, who, with the power of the pen, told the story of the Coontz Nation. And I cannot imagine being anywhere else on the face of the planet at this moment, at this hour, at this time, than to be right here with all of you. I think this is going to be one of those times in my life where I look back on this particular day, and it's not only going to be a memorable day, I've learned some personal lessons in the last 24 hours that I now want to share with you. So as a young child, I was born in 1970. I was born May 20th, 1970. This country was still in an era of terminating tribal nations. Many tribal nations were terminated. And 2 months after I was born, in July 1970, President Nixon stood before Congress to formally repudiate termination as federal policy. So I like to think that I was born at the 11th hour, at the 59th second of that era, to experience it upon my entry into this world, but my life was destined to be played out in an era of self-determination and self-governance. That was my gift, that was my calling, and that was my mission. So for the next 10 years or so, as a young child, I grew up in the state of Washington during the height of the fishing rights controversies. My grandparents fished for a living. I would wake up at the crack of dawn. It was still dark when I would carry a gasoline tank to my grandparents' rickety wooden boat. And we would get into our boat and go up the Coontz River. And it was our hope that when we came around the corner, we would see a sunk cork. That was a sign that we had fish and we had a living and we had a livelihood and we had something to nourish our family. And that was something that I didn't take for granted and I didn't take lightly. But on that river, I had many lessons. And my grandfather at one point told me and encouraged me to someday grow up to become an attorney. Now, for a young kid at Coontz, that seemed like wanting to grow up to become president, because no one in my family at that point had ever gone to college. But he told me that a law degree is a social tool, it's a political tool, it's an economic tool, and it can be used to advance our people. We knew about the Bolt decision. We knew about the cases. We saw on the news My mom was an assistant for Joe Delacruz, and I remember watching the evening news one night and watching her walk out of the courtroom in Hovey Baldridge and being so proud of my mom who, even though I hadn't seen her for days and there were times when she was away from home, I knew she was doing important work. And so that's the legacy that I have. Now, the lesson learned that I've discovered in the last 24 hours is that while we as individuals have hopes and dreams for our children, and as children, we have hopes and dreams for our lives, that is so limited. If you could imagine as a parent the best, brightest, most prosperous, most healthy life for your child that you could possibly imagine, that is still so limited. Because today, those of us that are here in this generation, we are the dream of our ancestors from centuries ago. And not only are we the dreams of our ancestors from centuries ago, we carry their DNA, which means we carry their strength, we carry their hopes, and we carry all that is good in them. And when you think of a single human being carrying that, that's pretty mind-blowing and that's incredible. But now, take a look at this room. Imagine the centuries of ancestors of each and every person in this room. Your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. That is who we are. And today I want to honor a century of those who have gifted so much to us. And I want to honor all those that stand here with me today, all those who are witness to it. This is a lesson that the Creator has gifted us on this day. I'm so grateful for the honor and privilege of being called to public service. I take every bit of that strength that I've inherited to advance not only the Quinault citizens and our people, but all people. To advance our environment, environmental justice, to bring about justice. And I now know, even more than ever, before yesterday morning and before this morning, I had a resolve in my mind that the challenges that our generation face, there's no question we're going to be able to meet those. We are never given more than that which we can handle. And today, I know in my deepest heart of hearts that not only do we have the strength and the honor and the respect and the dignity of each and every person that's alive today, but generations. And we all carry that together. So there's nothing that we cannot do. So do not get discouraged. I try very hard in these latest days to not, I resist the temptation to become negative, to become apathetic, all those things that are challenging our politic, but we're much better than that. And our history has proven that. So let's embrace it. Let's honor each other. And in closing, I've asked my son, who is 15, he was a year old when I was elected. So when I look at him, he is the life of my political career. And this last 2 years, he challenged me 2 years ago to join Tribal Journeys. And I thought I was just going to get into a canoe and spend a day. I spent weeks out on the water. And this last year, we went on Tribal Journeys with resolve to leave Quinault and pull to Lummi. Our first day was from La Push, and we pulled all the way to Nia Bay to Macaw, 14 hours. We saw a whale. We were followed by some porpoises. It was a beautiful day. When we came around Cape Flattery, there were some Macaw ladies and others who were welcoming us with just the most incredibly beautiful songs. The water was clear. Some eagles came out, and we just soaked it in as we left the Pacific and entered the Strait. The most challenging part of this year's journey was between Mukilteo and Hat Island. Currents were coming on both sides. Water was coming into the canoe. I was a pacer at the bow of the canoe, and there were points where my paddle wasn't even hitting water. And a sailboat came up along us and asked if we needed assistance. They couldn't believe we were in those conditions, but we pulled for 3 hours. And there was one point when I started to look around for our support boat, and I started to look at shore, and it looked like we were not going anywhere. And a thought occurred to me, and I can relate it to the lesson that I've received in the last 24 hours, and that is our ancestors. I saw our ancestors in the canoes, and that's how we got around. That was our highway, our sacred highways. And in that moment, I felt a tremendous strength in my hand, up my arm, across my chest, and I started anticipating the waves, and I was on fire. I felt an incredible adrenaline rush. And in reflection, now tribal journeys is something you experience, but the lesson doesn't come until after you land, when your mind can actually keep up with a spiritual gift and message. But my lesson out of that particular day was, you know, in life, we face challenges, we face adversity, and it's a simple choice. We can leave shore, get in a canoe, and go out and experience life, or we could sit on shore and watch it happen. But when we make that choice to get in our canoe, we understand we're going to be faced with challenges, risks. But when faced with risks, we have another simple choice, and that is we can either work against it in weakness and doubt, or we can work with it in strength and confidence. And today I know that we have many fine examples of those who faced adversity, and they didn't give up, they didn't lose hope. They worked with it in strength and confidence and felt the power of our ancestors and all that is good in our teachings. So with that, that's an introduction to tribal journeys and our culture. Now my son, since we got back from last year, took a kayak to the Upper Quinaults, picked up an eagle feather, and for the first time was gifted a song. And we do not know of songs that have been gifted from Lake Quinault, from the lake. And so we've had many paddle songs, we have other songs, but in the last 2 years, he now has 18 original songs that have been gifted to him over the last 2 years. And so this morning, I told him about the lesson that I learned from my fast, and I asked him, I said, don't answer, just give it some thought. This is what's coming to mind, that we want to honor those who are here today with an honor song, and he was very happy to do that. So I'd like to invite my son Daniel forward to sing an honor song.
Gauk Nampusquas, Unschuk Daniel, Jatol Quinail, Sa'alat Nitsiguilais, Sioquil. Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Malvini. I'm from the Quinault tribe, and I also represent a family of the lake, which is Sa'alat Nitsiguilais. Today I will be singing I call it the Creator's Honor Song. And it's a song that honors all of our leaders and the Creator for all He's done for us, and just a blessing of today, because today is a really big day, and it's our state, we're making history today, and it's really important that we give thanks and honor to everyone that's been a part of this. So, Sioquil. Whoa, whoa, yo. Whoa, whoa, yo. Whoa, whoa,
Thank you, Daniel. And Fawn, I'm pretty sure that you heard the creator. That was, for not knowing what you were going to say, that was remarkable. Thank you for sharing. Now I would like to invite up Stephanie Coontz.
Well, it's hard to follow that, particularly when you want to kind of get down to maybe couple of depressing points as well as exciting points. During the last week, almost everyone who heard I was going to be speaking at this asked me some version of the old, is the glass half full or glass half full empty kind of question about where we stand with gender equality, which was interesting to me because last year at a conference in Belgium, I was shown a chart that researchers had made that ranked all the world's countries on a scale from complete gender inequality to what would be complete gender equality. Now, the countries that rank the highest on that scale are so far above the ones that rank the lowest that you have to really compress the size of the graph in order to fit all the countries on the same page. But the most egalitarian countries are just as far below the full equality benchmark as they are above the least egalitarian countries. So there's your half full, half empty. But for me, though, a better and more optimistic way to think about that question and to understand how far we've come in the struggle for gender equality is to think of that struggle as involving two different glasses. One that we need to empty and another we need to fill. One glass, and it's a huge one, has been around for thousands of years, packed with layer after layer of patriarchal laws and ideologies, male-dominant political hierarchies, sexist stereotypes, and officially sanctioned or at least openly tolerated violence against women. It's only in the last 100 years, really, that women have begun to get the leverage to start digging out those layers of oppressive institutions and ideas. And we've excavated a lot of crap. I mean, seriously, we have. In America, in the last 40 years, just in 40 years, we've overturned every law that explicitly codified discrimination. And we're talking literally hundreds of laws and regulations. And we've made tremendous strides in reversing centuries-old social prejudices. As late as 1977, 2/3 of Americans insisted that it was best for men to be the achievers and decision makers in the family and in society at large. By 2016, 2/3 rejected that idea. But simply emptying one glass of the instruments of enforcing male dominance isn't enough to achieve gender equity. We also have to find a nice new clean glass that we can fill with the tools needed to make legal and ideological equality more than just an abstract piety. The things you need, for example, the right of women to control our own bodies, to decide if and when we're going to have children, or the policies and programs we need to make sure that if you want to work outside the home, you don't have to have a support person who has to stay home to take care of the rest of life. And as Christine pointed out, Washington has been ahead of the curve in this effort with our comparable worth campaigns, our efforts to establish family leave and minimum wage policies, and our recognition that equality means addressing the needs of women, the differing needs of women in every racial, ethnic group and social class. We've come, this is a historian talking, an amazingly long way in what, for a historical perspective, is an extremely, astonishingly short time. But, of course, once you start digging down, you know how things get impacted. The closer we've gotten to emptying that first glass, the harder we have to work to dig out the encrusted last dregs at the bottom. the male supremacist groups like Return of Kings, the various incels, the white Christian nationalists who tell women to submit to their Lord and their master, and they're not talking about Jesus, and the troglodytes in so many courts and legislatures who can't be bothered punishing men who violate women's bodies, but are endlessly eager to punish women who try to control their own bodies. And as we dig out the dregs from that old glass, we also face new challenges in filling the other glass, because even as gender inequality has decreased, class inequality has increased, making the U.S. about the most unequal country in the developed world. The top 1% of households in the U.S. own more than 42% of the nation's wealth. In no other industrial nation, not even the second most unequal, does the richest 1% own more than 28%. It's extraordinary. And I thought that was high, but 42%. This inequality really complicates our traditional economic and social hierarchies. As late as 1980, the highest earning women in America earned less than the average earning or the middle earning men. Today, the highest earning women earn much less than the highest earning men. In fact, that's where the gender gap is actually higher than any other section of the population. But they earn much more than the average earning men, much, much more than the lower earning men. And of course, they earn much, 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 much more than the average earning women. And I could go on with a lot more muches for the lowest earning women. So the political challenge facing us today is different than 100 or even 50 years ago. To find ways to push for gender equality that don't ignore or even reinforce the growth of socioeconomic inequality among women as well as men. And we won't meet that challenge by joining lean-in circles. We will meet it only by participating in reach-out circles that spread like ripples around this country. And that's one thing that isn't different from 100 years ago. The need to create and then channel mass sentiment and action on behalf of the gender equality that we want and the social equality that we need to make that work for people. So I want to honor this 100-year anniversary by reminding us of what the suffragists achieved when they stopped doing the equally futile exercises of, on the one hand, trying to sweet-talk the powers that be into getting their way, and on the other hand, raging against them, the powers that be, as, you know, whatever they are. Or when they actually started to go out to identify and persuade potential allies, and then mobilize those allies, that they reach wherever they were and move them as they could in mass demonstrations that could not be ignored. And I want to end by just telling you what I think was the best example of the impact that has, because it comes from a description that Jesse Lynch Williams wrote about watching these massive demonstrations back more than 100 years ago from in New York, from the Fifth Avenue Men's Club that was way at the top of the tall buildings. And he said it was a Saturday afternoon, and the members had crowded around the windows to witness this show, you know, and there were all these women coming down, and so they were exchanging the kind of jokes you would expect, ha ha ha, and when the head of the procession came directly underneath them, they were laughing. A couple of them tried to throw cigars out the window, you know, to see what would happen. They were joking around, and as the procession swept past, they laughed and laughed, and the jokes kept coming. But the women continued to pour by, you know, for a long time. And the jokes got a little, you know, more distant in between. The laughter got a little more in between. He said, finally, there was only, as the parade went on and on, there was only the occasional sound of the clink of ice in the glasses. Hours passed, that's what he said. Then someone broke the silence. "Well, boys," she said, "I guess they mean it." And the best way for us to celebrate this centennial and to stay ahead of the curve is to keep reminding the boys, and some of the girls as well, that we still mean it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now I would like to invite Trish Millines Dziko. Gosh, and I've been stressing out since this morning that I was going to trip, and I did. Let me try that again. Do over. Maybe TVW will redo it. Trish Millines Dziko to the podium, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for coming out here to celebrate with us. I think I can speak for everyone up here that our success is not our own. It belongs to whatever village that raised us. My life has been worth living every single day because of the people who love me, the people I love, and the work I enjoy doing every single day. So for the last 23 years, our team at the Technology Access Foundation, y'all are back there, raise your hands. Yes. Share. Yes. So we've been finding ways to ensure that traditionally underserved students of color can discover, nurture, and use their genius for the good of their communities. So we started in the after-school space, and while our outcomes were great, we realized we needed to do more for more students. So in 2008, we took a very big, brave step, and we opened the only public school in Washington State that's co-managed by a nonprofit and a school district. And that school district was Federal Way Public Schools under the leadership of Tom Murphy, who's now retired, having fun in the island somewhere. So that school is called Taft Academy, and it has gone on to win numerous national awards. It's been a 7-time School of Distinction, 7 years in a row, winner for the state. We have a 95% on-time high school graduation rate. There you go. What's that? Did I burn down the house? Oh, that's okay. What do we have?
I guess we need to exit.
Okay. That's okay.
That's fine. We'll come back. Okay, Bob, go ahead, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, guys. If you guys could evacuate out of the legislative building, and if you could go, how about we go out here to the sundial, the south side of the building, and give some space between the building. Thank you.
Hey, thank you all for staying and hanging out. And thank you to the people who came up to me and gave me those great fire jokes. That was nice. That was good. So in the interest of time, I'm going to pick up where I left off. So I was talking about Taft Academy and what a great school it is. We have a 95% on-time graduation rate. 100% of those students were accepted to college, and 91% of them attended college right after graduating high school. Thank you. So our original plan was to do 5 schools like this. And things didn't quite work out. Charter schools came in 2012. And here we are sitting on this wonderful model. What do we do with it? So we took it and we codified it down to its essence and said, can we take this model that we now call STEM by Taft, can we take it and partner with existing public schools and help transform them into a school that operates better for students and for teachers? So right now we're spreading this model. We have 4 schools that are running the model in addition to Taft Academy. And we are choosing districts who are willing to deeply connect with students and disrupt the current formulaic school models at every level from kindergarten to 12th grade. So what we do is we work with them for 5 years to create a culture of high expectations and the support to meet them, to implement a teaching style that's designed towards student voice, choice, and leadership, and to curate content that is culturally and communally relevant. And finally, to enlist the community to support the learning and provide resources. So our intent really is to create a bunch of schools that have academic environments that eliminate race-based disparity in academic achievement and promote the highest level of student learning and teacher development. We want to produce more students who are socially conscious and self-aware, armed with the 21st century skills needed to succeed, and positioned to create the world they envision personally, communally, nationally, and globally. So to give you a sense of what these schools are like, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a minute, and I'm going to describe to you the vision that every one of our schools, now there are 5 total, every one of our schools have signed on to. So imagine a public school that redefines STEM literacy, equitable education, and what it means to be a well-educated 21st century student. Imagine a school known for encouraging innovation, for pushing the limits of what is expected, delivering curriculum in a way that is relevant to real-world needs and goals of students, and creating an environment that promotes academic success through a social justice lens. Imagine a school where learning is designed for and often by the students, where teachers collaborate as part of their daily practice and learn alongside their students, where parents are welcome in the classrooms at any time, and where professionals in other fields participate in teaching and learning. When you walk into this school, you sense there is a bond of caring between all groups, teachers, students, leadership, and support staff, where people look out for each other and students support each other to do their very best. Now, STEM by Taft schools are schools where generations of families in the community aspire to learn and educators from around the state desire to teach. Known as a hub of innovation that trains compassionate leaders who give back, each STEM by Taft school is a valuable asset that seeks to leverage the skills and talents of the students for the betterment of their local and global community. The principal is the steward of this great school vision, ensuring a laser focus on the mission of the school. The principal creates maximum opportunities for teachers to develop their craft and to collaborate with adults from other professions to develop an authentic learning experience. The principal fosters an environment where adults and students are encouraged to share their passions and celebrate their personal learning journeys. Teachers are seen and treated as highly respected professionals with a great deal of autonomy over their classroom. Teachers serve as the facilitators of learning and to continuously strive to cultivate the type of environment that enables everyone in the school to grow as individuals who contribute to the good of the whole. STEM by Taft teachers provide multiple rich learning experiences for their students. They use inquiry as a lens for equity and explore diverse forms of knowledge and experience. They make sure students see themselves, their cultures, and their interests in the work they do. Teachers are encouraged and supported as they model the kind of learning they want their students to emulate. Teachers fully support each student, by providing an individualized roadmap to their personal goals and ambitions. We understand that regardless of background, students envision themselves being successful in life. Students learn to succeed not for standards or teacher expectations, not to compete in the workforce and fuel the economy, not for personal gain and prestige, but so they can position themselves to create the world they themselves envision, personally, communally, nationally, and globally. STEM by Taft schools challenge students with the issues of the 21st century. Each student grapples with their personal, communal, and cultural role in the global systems of environment and life. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics permeate the curriculum to ensure that our students are wielding the most efficient and effective tools to analyze, communicate, synthesize, and evaluate their work and the world around them. STEM by TAF students explore new worlds of science, art, language, and society. They learn, create, teach, and inspire. They are comfortable grappling with complex issues, engaging in intellectual risk-taking, persisting through challenges. STEM by TAF schools bring to life true performance-based assessment where students are graded not on the answers they provide, but on the work of their hands and minds and their efforts to make positive change and impact the world. These great schools create a culture that invites and connects with community members, especially students' families. They provide a hospitable environment that respects the needs of its participants by honoring their culture and their time. To attend each STEM by TAF school is to join a family. STEM by TAF schools aim to produce the next generation of well-rounded learners who draw on experiences throughout their STEM by TAF school career to drive their future and become leaders. Leaders for our community, leaders for our country, and leaders for our world. That is our vision. And I will finish by saying it takes a committed, really committed and brave group of people to do this work. We have an amazing team, and I happen to believe I am the luckiest executive director on the face of the earth. All right? But we can't do this work by ourselves. Our goal is to have our STEM by TAF model all the way through our state. And what I'm inviting all of you to do is to become a Team TAF member. That means to give your time, your talent, and your treasures to this work so that we can spread across the state. Our goal is 60 schools by 2036, which we will be 40 years old. On behalf of everyone in my little universe, I want to thank you so much for this honor. Thank you.
Well done. To have a fire alarm interrupt the middle of your speech and then have to walk up all the steps and present. Outstanding. Thank you so much, Trish. Now, please welcome Laurie Matsukawa to this podium.
Thank you, Secretary Wyman, and thank you all for coming back after the fire drill. My goodness. I am honored and really overwhelmed to be with you today with such inspiring women. Several of you are sitting right there in the audience. But I'd also like to thank some of the men that have been so supportive of us and our mission all these years too. And I want to bring to attention my husband, Larry Blackstock. He doesn't know that I'm saying this, but hearing your stories and hearing your sharing, I had to think about how important it was for me living my life to have such a supportive man in my life, one who was raised by a single mother, one who was outraged when she required the signature of her divorced husband in order to buy her own car. This is the environment that formed my husband's attitude and has translated into support for myself and other women who are trying to live their best lives. And so I just wanted to thank you, Larry. This exhibit at the Secretary of State's office is very comprehensive, and there is a portion that addresses the broadcast journalism part. The passing Tuesday of Cokie Roberts, a true pioneer and mentor, only emphasizes the fact that women in visible broadcast roles are still a fairly recent phenomenon. I was an intern at the Honolulu Advertiser when my managing editor, Mike Middlesworth, said, Have you ever thought of being a television reporter? You know, they're hiring women these days. And this was in the mid-70s. The mid-70s, people. King Television had many female firsts. Besides the nation's first female owner, Mrs. Bullitt, there was the nation's first female nightly news anchor, Jean Enerson. The state's first Black female television host, Roberta Byrd Barr, who hosted Face to Face, which was produced by the state's first female producer of a weekly news series, Jean Walkinshaw. This was back in the 70s. The state's first Native American news anchor also worked at King 5, Hattie Kaufman. Jean Enerson told me that being the nation's first female news anchor was not top of mind for her. She said it was always about being there, being at the table, or in her case, the news desk. It was doing the best reporting and storytelling possible, because then people will know you can do the job. They cannot question you. In my 36 years at King, it was my privilege to be a reporter and anchor of color. Like Jean, I always considered my top priority doing the job. Only recently have I realized that by being there, we are also inspiring the next generation of women and women of color to think, I could do that job too. We are inspiring the next generation, and nothing could make me prouder. Minute 30. Thank you very much.
Justice Madsen, I think the bar has now been raised a little. Please give a warm welcome to our final speaker, Justice Barbara Madsen.
Raising the bar, final speaker. Is there a hint in any of that, Secretary Wyman? I understand, and this is my first time speaking after a fire drill, so we'll see how I do. I want to thank you first for having this ceremony, the exhibit downstairs, the work of the Legacy Project. I want to thank John Hughes, who I have, you know, a second to my husband, maybe. I love him more than anyone. He was one of the first people I met when I was campaigning for the Supreme Court, and he was one of the few editors who treated me with great respect in that time. So I really love John, and thank you. So our current chief is Mary Fairhurst, and she was intended to be here, and I believe she's in the exhibit. And the chapter that pertains to Mary really, though, is the story of all of the women on our court. And so when she took ill and couldn't be here, I was asked to come in and speak. So I will do that, but I really can't tell you Mary's story in the way that she could tell it. So I will just say a few things. One, Mary gave us our first female majority in this state when she was elected to the Supreme Court. So we have her to thank for breaking a glass ceiling in our state. I also would say that if she were here, she would do her joy pose. So I want to do that for her. Mary is a trooper. She is battling cancer, and she is in court every day. Some days it gets the better of her, and some days she gets the better of it. And today is one of those days when I'm here because it's gotten the better of her today. But I have every belief that she will continue to be with us into the future for a very long time. I also wanted to acknowledge Carolyn Dimmick. I know that she was introduced earlier, but Carolyn, as the first woman on the Washington Supreme Court, I was a young attorney, and it just never occurred to me that a woman could be a judge. And then there was Carolyn, and Carolyn became a member of our state Supreme Court. So Carolyn, we owe such a debt to you in our profession for
being that trailblazer and taking the risks. I know what it feels like to be in a room with people that don't look like you and don't necessarily respect what you have to say. So you are my heroine. Thank you. And I think we should applaud. And I also, of course, want to acknowledge the other women who make up that 6-person majority. I don't know whether any of them are here. I know Deborah Stevens is here. Deborah joined us in 12 years ago now. 12 years ago? Susan Owens, Mary Yu, and Cheryl Gordon McLeod are the other women on the court. I did want to, because this is a history project, I wanted to talk a little bit about history because when I was a little girl, I actually thought history could only be made by men because that's the only people who were in our history books were men. Of course, there was Abigail, the wife of our President Adams, but she kind of played a small role. But otherwise, it seemed to be all men, and this was kind of reinforced by my daughter when she was in grade school, and she came home one day and they had a history project, and they had to choose to be a person of historical consequence. They had to dress up like that person, they had to write the history of that person, they had to present it to a group of their peers and adults, and she came home and she was very upset because she hadn't chosen who she was going to be. And she said, you know, why couldn't I have been born a boy? And I said, well, why would you want to be a boy? And she said, well, because they're the only ones who can be president. So I have a deep place in my heart for history and how we write it. I remember hearing in my youth that the history is written by the victors. And to date, it's sort of been men being the victors and sort of writing the history. And that's why I am so grateful to the History Project here in the Secretary of State's office, because John is a feminist, I think. And he was willing to dig for the history that women have made. And we know women were here, right? It was like we were not making history. Of course we were making history. You just have to dig for it, right? You just have to dig for the impact that women had in the history of not only our state, but this country and this world. I remember thinking when I was reading about, my son was at Evergreen State College, and he was taking a class on Native American history, and he came, I used to read his books because, you know, otherwise I didn't know what to talk to him about. So I would read his books, and one of the books talked about the Iroquois League of Nations, which was the pattern for our federal system. And as I was reading about this, what I learned was that women had elected positions in this League of Nations, and so there's history there that we don't learn about. Sowing Good Seeds, the author of that book, who it's a book regarding the suffrage movement here in Washington State and the various luminary figures who came through Washington to advocate for the rights of women to vote. As he said, the deeds of women were found in cookbooks and quilts. And that was how women communicated what they were doing. But they were up to a lot through those cookbooks and those quilts, that they actually sent messages to each other when the question for whether or not we should vote for the right of women to vote here in this state, they communicated through their cookbooks and through their quilts. So it's there to be had, and I'm just happy to see it being surfaced. We are here to celebrate celebrate suffrage for women, and there was a comment by one of the earlier speakers about Washington State, maybe it was the Secretary of State, who said that our Washington Supreme Court struck down the right of women to vote, or found that there was no right of women to vote. But in defense of the court, here I am on the court, right? Our court was the first, actually, to find that there was a right of women to vote, and that was because the court was faced with the question of whether women could serve on grand juries, and our court said yes. Sadly, 5 years later, in another case, we said no. We were wrong, but a court is permitted, I guess, to change its minds. But it really is my affiliation with the court that I believe I was asked to come here to talk about. And so I did want to talk about that. In America, we are taught that the place to look for justice is in our courts. Because, of course, that's what courts do. They protect the rights of the minorities. They protect individual liberties. The legislature passes for the majority, but the courts are there to protect the individual liberties. And so when I was a young lawyer, when I went to law school, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't really know that that wasn't true, that you don't always get justice in court. I believed that that's where you could get justice. But when I went to law school, I realized that women were not necessarily welcome in the law. I learned that in the first week of law school when several of my male colleagues came up and said, why are you here? And I wondered, well, because I got accepted, I guess, but no, it was because they were asking me, why are you here? Because you're taking a seat that belongs to a man. So you can imagine when I saw the movie about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she had the exact same experience as I did, I thought this was a universal concern that women were taking the seats that belonged to men. In a justice system that's supposed to deliver justice to everyone, this was a disconnect for me. So how did I come to be where I am? And I think this is an important point for me to make, I think. And that is, in 1992, we had something called the Year of the Woman. And Governor Gregoire referred to that year. That was the year she became the Attorney General. It was the year that I ran for the Supreme Court. And what motivated me, and I think what motivated probably Governor Gregoire and others, was the Senate hearings on the confirmation of Clarence Thomas. Now, have we seen a reprise of that recently? But it was shocking to watch the Senate hearings, and it motivated many of us to seek public office. And it was that experience, watching those hearings, that caused me to want to join our court. I had no idea how to do it or what I was going to do once I got there, but I did know that it was extremely important in a profession that where my colleagues had asked me, what are you doing here? And you shouldn't have a seat at the table, that I, in fact, should have a seat at the table. And so I ran and I won that election, and that's where I met John. Having won the seat wasn't enough, of course, because the big question is, does it matter that women have a place in public life? Does it matter that we win elections, that we sit on courts? Well, that's for everyone to judge, but in my personal opinion, it absolutely does. And I will cite a few things that I consider to be proof of that. When I joined the court, we established for the first time, and we were one of the first courts in the country, to establish an Access to Justice Board. Now, if you are familiar with the Access to Justice movement, it is a recognition that people in poverty have no access to our justice system. So our justice system is not providing the justice that we all believe that we are entitled to have in our courts of law. And who do you suppose that impacts more than anyone else? Women. So we started an Access to Justice Board to try to find ways to make the courts more accessible for women, and particularly women and people who are impoverished or who have no voice otherwise. We started the Gender and Justice Commission, which I chaired for 20 years. And one of the highlights of that commission was when we convinced the legislature, we advocated and convinced the legislature that women who are in jail or in prison should not be shackled when they are in labor and delivery. My son asked me, well, what do they think they're going to run away when they're giving birth? But this is the sort of thing that having women on the court and having women in positions of power will achieve. It will bring to the forefront issues that would not otherwise come to the attention of the electorate. So the Gender and Justice Commission was established. We've done many things through that commission. we organized a Minority and Justice Commission, and the Minority and Justice Commission is looking at issues not only of women, but women of color and youth of color, and have done tremendous work in changing the laws that discriminate against people based upon race and gender. And we have the Interpreter Commission, so that people who don't have the language skills to be able to represent themselves in court, because of course they don't have a lawyer, and they can't even speak English, we have an interpreter commission to try to break down the barriers for people who have that challenge. And also the Commission on Children in Foster Care, which I've just become the co-chair of that commission, and looking at issues of disparate treatment in the foster care system. Children of color outweigh the number of children, white children in the system by double their numbers in our community. So these commissions, and I point to you as proof that it has mattered to have these issues brought to the fore by justices of our Supreme Court, and that if we did not have the men and the women on the court who care about justice and care about the system, actually hearing all of the voices, we would not have the progress we've had in this state, in our legal community, and in our legal system. We have, as I said, a current Chief Justice who is a female. In closing, I want to just say that it is my hope that every year will be the Year of the Woman, and that every time we elect a new chief for the next 4 to 5 years, that it's a woman. Because there was a time when all we elected were men, and I'm just tired of hearing people say, well, you've already had a woman chief. So my hope for the future is that we have woman after woman after woman as Chief Justice of our Washington State Supreme Court. After all, as Judge Fuller from this community once said, a man's point of view and a woman's point of view equal the human point of view. We need both. Thank you.
I want to share one story with you. I thought Justice Madsen was going to share one more thing with you. When she and I entered that first-year law school class, and we both were told that we were displacing well-qualified men who could be in the class. Let's be clear, we were a grand total of 12 women out of a class of over 325. So, I don't know how many we displaced with our process.
Wow. Well, what a powerful afternoon. And as I look at these powerhouse women, you all inspire me so much. And thank you for what you've done, because you made it easy for my, I followed many of you. I won't say that you're more mature than I am, because you're not that much older. But what I can tell you is that you broke down doors, and I got to walk through them. And women who follow me have gotten to too. And it was just, I am sorry, I'm getting all teary. I do this and I apologize, because you think oh yeah, I'm not supposed to apologize. Oh, there's so much to remember. But I really mean it. The things, when I hear these incredible stories of the passion and the strength that as I look around this entire room full of these powerhouse women, the things that each of you did to be the first, to be the pioneer, to be the leader, you inspire. There were some young women in here earlier, some young girls. That's what our job is to inspire them, and you all are truly an inspiration. So thank you so much for letting us share your stories, because we're going to get to inspire so many more because of your generosity to share and tell your stories. So let's give them one more round of applause, please. Thank you. Yes. Thank you all. Thank you. Wow. Okay. All right. On that note, just a couple housekeeping things to wind up this wonderful event. We are actually grand opening the exhibit, and I want to invite all of you to join us downstairs in the Secretary of State's office for some refreshments. A few housekeeping things. First of all, we could not do this important work if it weren't for our wonderful sponsors, and two that I would like to give a shout out to are our platinum sponsors, the University of Washington, and the Votes for Women Centennial Grant Program. The support of those two platinum sponsors. Go ahead and give it another applause. Combined with that, the support of our other sponsors who are listed down in our office and on our programs, I hope, really made this whole exhibit possible. And in the outreach we're going to be able to do to students and classrooms across the state and people reading the book and, of course, buying it for the holidays, it will be available, are all things that further this sharing of our important history. And it's just an honor to get to do this work. So my last housekeeping thing is that we're going to be honoring all of our sponsors and all of these wonderful subjects of our book, and the chaperones are going to escort them first downstairs, and then we invite all of you down to the second floor to the Secretary of State's office. Thank you so much for coming back after the fire drill. Thank you for being here tonight, and have a wonderful evening.